Okay, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me for another biology-inspired video here. What we're going to be discussing today are ecological interactions. So primarily, when you're in ecology, that's the study of organisms interacting with each other and their environment. So today, we're going to be focusing on organisms interacting with one another and what those interactions can go ahead and look like. Three of the main topics we're going to be discussing today are symbiosis, predation, and competition. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get to it, shall we? The first thing I wanted to discuss with you is the difference between a habitat and a niche. So a habitat is an area where an organism lives, whereas a niche is an organism's role in its environment. So a good way of thinking about this would be like a habitat is an address in an ecosystem where something lives, whereas a niche would be like an occupation or a job in an ecosystem. So for example, let's just go ahead and say that traditionally, my habitat would be, for the most part, a school. My niche in that school is what I do in that school. So my niche would be a teacher. So depending on where you go, depending on the environment, the habitat, your niche can change. For example, when I go home, I'm not a teacher. I'm just a regular person like anybody else. Let's talk about community interactions. So, as we said before, when organisms live closely together in an ecological community, and if you remember a community, we're talking about different organisms, all the different organisms living in the same area. There are interactions occurring constantly. The three major types of interactions we're going to be discussing today are competition, predation, and symbiosis. And we're going to be discussing what each one is, as well as some examples of what they look like. So first, let's talk about competition. By definition, simply put, competition is, well, competing for resources. This occurs due to a limited number of resources. This can be things like territory. This can be finding a mate. This can be food, anything like that. Think about the African savanna here. When something makes a kill, let's say a lion takes down a zebra, why not? Once that happens, there are going to be scavengers. There's going to be other organisms that are going to be vying for that kill, that are going to be vying for that resource, that food. So a resource is any necessity of life. So water, nutrients, light, habitat, food, anything of that nature. The last thing I wanted to talk about with competition is called the competitive exclusion principle, which simply states that no two species can occupy the same niche in the same habitat at the same time. So all that's trying to say is that if two organisms are going ahead and trying to occupy the same niche in the same habitat at the same time, like that example I said earlier about the lion taking down a zebra, there's a good possibility that things like hyenas are probably going to go ahead and come in and try to get some of that. So by that, we have two organisms that are now competing for that resource of food. Predation. Predation is when an organism captures and feeds upon another organism. The predator is often the hunter, whereas the prey is the hunted. So in this example here in the photo, you can see that a lynx is going ahead and taking down a hare. So depending on the ecosystem, depending on the area, these predation relationships are going to look a little bit different. Obviously, depending on where you're at, it would be a hare or a lynx, or a shark and a seal. You know, the main thing here is one organism hunts, the other is hunted. The last type is one of my favorite biological concepts, and that is the process of symbiosis. So symbiosis is any relationship where two species live closely together. And there are three types: mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. Now, the reason that you may be wondering here, why is Venom from the Spider-Man series, why is Venom here? Well, I'm glad you asked. Or if you didn't, I'm going to say it anyway. So Venom is actually comprised of two different beings. We have the alien symbiote and the human host, Eddie Brock. So here we have two different species of organism living closely together. Now, regarding if this is a mutualistic, commensalistic, or parasitic relationship, that's up to you to go ahead and decide. But the main thing here is that symbiosis is two different species or two different organisms living in close proximity or relation to one another. So let's talk about the first one. The first type is mutualism. So with mutualism, both species or organisms benefit from the relationship. For example, in this top one, we have the crocodile and the plover. At first, you might be thinking, what in the world is this bird doing? Well, I'll tell you. This bird and these crocodiles have developed a very unique relationship over the years. The crocodiles go ahead and bask in the sun with their mouths open. The plovers will go ahead and pick at the teeth of the crocodiles, going ahead and removing any rotting flesh, meat, things of that nature. Whereas, so the crocodile here goes ahead and gets a dental checkup, and the plover gets some food. Likewise, nothing is going to go ahead and mess with that plover while it's right next to a gigantic crocodile. So both parties benefit from the relationship. Another example, and a very important one, are the bacteria that often live inside the roots of plants. So these bacteria go ahead and set up inside the roots of these plants. So the bacteria has a place, a habitat, a home inside the roots of the plants. And you might be thinking, well, what do the plants get out of this? So inside the soil, there is unusable nitrogen in the form of ammonia. What these bacteria can do is every living thing needs nitrogen to survive. So what these bacteria can do is they convert that ammonia into a usable form of nitrogen for the plant. So the plant gets its nitrogen and the bacteria gets a home to live in. Pretty beneficial for both parties. The next type of symbiosis is commensalism. Now, commensalism is when one member of a symbiotic relationship benefits and the other is neither helped nor harmed. So, for example, if you look at the whale here in the bottom right, above it, these are barnacles. So barnacles can often go ahead and attach themselves to the surface of a whale. Now, this does not hurt the whale, but what it does is it provides the barnacles with a free ride. So these barnacles can go ahead and travel along with the whale, and the whale is neither hurt nor helped. Another example are sharks and remoras. So the remoras are the tiny fish that go ahead and can often be found swimming with sharks. This doesn't bother the sharks at all. They go about their daily business because, they're a shark. However, the remoras get protection by being around the shark. Also, they can get access to free food and meals after a shark is finished with it, whatever it is they attack. So we talked about the good, we talked about the ones that don't do much, and now we're going to talk about the harmful, also the ugly. Parasitism. The last type of symbiosis is parasitism, and that is when one creature benefits and one creature is harmed. For example, these top two photos are of a tapeworm. A tapeworm is a parasite that sets up shop inside the intestines of humans and feeds on the nutrients flowing through their small intestine. Another classic example of parasites here include, like the bottom left, a flea, as well as the bottom right, a tick. So often these individuals will feed off of a host creature. However, it's important to note that they do not want to kill the host creature. Because if you think about it, if the host creature dies, the parasite loses its source of food. So often it will go ahead and hurt, harm, and generally debilitate the host, but it won't try to kill it. At least not immediately, anyway. So ticks, they feed off the blood of things like dogs, deer, cats, and even humans, and often carry some pretty wicked sicknesses and disease like Lyme's disease. So simply put, parasitism, this is the ugly, this is the bad, this is where something is harmed, where the other creature benefits. And ladies and gentlemen, that is going to go ahead and summarize and stop our video here on ecological interactions. If you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and contact your teacher. They'll point you in the right direction. So until the next video, you all go ahead, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.